Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. This week we're going to be talking about one of the most prolific UK missing people cases of all time. We're talking about Claudia Lawrence. Claudia Elizabeth Lawrence was 35 years old when she disappeared from York in England on the 18th of March 2009, meaning that we're very soon coming up to the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance and we're still no closer to finding her. Claudia was born on the 27th of February 1974 to her parents Peter and Joan, and she had a very happy childhood. Peter was a solicitor and Joan stayed at home raising Claudia and her sister. As a child, Claudia loved horses. Her entire world revolved around them and she was always really popular, a trait that carried on into her adult life as well. Everyone who was interviewed after her disappearance said that Claudia had so many friends. People just really liked her. And from everything I read, Claudia was just a really well-liked person. Nobody had anything bad to say about her. As Claudia grew up, she became a professional chef, and by the time she disappeared, she was working at the University of York. She was working at the Goodrick College within the university. She loved her job, she got on really well with her colleagues, and she'd actually taken the job because of the hours. The hours worked really well for Claudia. Obviously most chef jobs, most jobs in restaurants, you're working late into the night, so you start mid-afternoon and work until midnight-ish. A lot of the jobs Claudia had beforehand were in pubs, places like that, so it was really unsociable hours. So when Claudia was offered the job at the university, where the hours would be about 6 AM till mid-afternoon, she jumped at the chance to take it. Claudia was a very sociable person, so she liked having the opportunity to get up early in the morning, go to work, and then see her friends in the afternoon. The day before Claudia went missing was the 17th of March and she finished work at 2:30 PM. She then walked the 3 miles home to her house where she lived alone on Heworth Road. Now it's worth noting that Claudia did have a car, but it was actually in for repair at this point, and I actually only saw that on a forum. I couldn't find any official source stating that, but a couple of people in different forums have stated this, so I can't 100% confirm that's true, but they said that Claudia did have a car and was in for repair. But again, I don't know if Claudia always walked to work or if she would usually drive, and just walking to work this day was a fluke. On Claudia's way home, she stops at a post office where CCTV footage shows her walking up to the post box and posting a letter. Now, a lot of weight has been posted on this letter. When you sort of look at Claudia's case online, there's so many people talking about this letter. Who was she writing to? What was it? Who was she sending it to? And honestly, I think a little bit too much attention is focused on this letter. It literally could have been anything. It doesn't have to be related to her disappearance, and to be honest, I highly doubt that it was. No family member or friend ever reported receiving a letter from her, but then again, this was 2009 and who wrote handwritten letters back then? Not many people. Personally, I'm inclined to believe there was something a little bit more boring, like a cheque being sent off to pay a bill or a parking fine being paid or something along those lines. I highly doubt it was an intricate handwritten letter going to somebody. It was probably just something more official than that. I would be very shocked if this letter ever turned out to have any significance in the case. Of course, there's a chance it would do, but I just find it's more unlikely than it is likely. As Claudia carries on her walk home, a female colleague actually drives past her, sees her walking and stops to offer her a lift, which Claudia accepts. So the female colleague drives Claudia back to her home and drops her off just outside of her house. Now when Claudia gets back to her house, I'm a little bit iffy on what exactly happened here. So this may be a little bit wrong, but what I've been able to piece together is that Claudia didn't immediately go into her house. She actually walked a little bit up the road to a pub called the Nag's Head, which was her local. I think it was actually either next door or opposite her house. And she didn't go into the pub, but she stops outside the pub to talk to a lady who had a pram with her. They just chat for a little bit, just a bit of small talk, before Claudia eventually walks back into her house. And from everything I can find out, that was it. She stayed in her house for the rest of the night. This is kind of the problem when cases are so well publicised and there's so many different sources with different information, because you never know exactly which one's the right one, and the details only change kind of. Like some sources say that she went into her house first and then came back out of the house to walk up the road and then back. Some sources say that she walked up the road and then into her house. I suppose it's not really too relevant, but just to let you know that I might be a little bit iffy on that detail. So the last sighting of Claudia is at 3:05 PM as she's walking into her house. At 8:10 p.m, Claudia has a phone conversation with her dad, and then shortly after that she has another phone conversation with her mum. Now her parents are actually divorced, her parents aren't on good terms, they don't really talk, so Claudia is kind of the one in the middle, calling her dad, then calling her mum, and she was close with both of them. She was really, really close with her parents. As she's on the phone with her mum, she says to her that she's going to go to bed soon around 9 p.m because she's got to get up early for work the next morning, and she says to her that she's going to see her on Sunday, which was Mother's Day. And this is a very important detail because it shows that Claudia was making plans past the next day. She told her mum that she was going to see her on Mother's Day. At 8:23 p.m, Claudia sends her last text to a friend, and this is the last point at which we know that Claudia is 100% alive. After this, we can't be so sure. At 9:12 p.m, Claudia receives a text, but she never replies to it, and it's not known if she ever even saw this text. Friends said that Claudia was the type of person that as soon as she saw a text, she would reply to it. She wouldn't just put her phone down and say, I'll come back to it later, and then forget like I do every single time. She was constantly texting and constantly on her phone, and she would actually worry that if she didn't reply that people would worry about her. She was that kind of person. And when police later looked into Claudia's phone records, they were very confused by this abrupt, sudden stop in texting. The fact that she didn't reply to this message at 9:12 p.m, because Claudia would send thousands of texts every month. She was a constant texter. She was always talking to her friends. Like I said, she was really, really popular. She had loads of different conversations going at all times. And the police said that usually most nights Claudia would continue texting like much later than 8:23 p.m. and this was an anomaly. This was strange for her to stop texting at such an early point. Even if she was going to bed at 9 p.m, like she told her mum, it still seemed weird to the police. There were 37 minutes-ish there where she still wasn't replying to people. And even if she was lying to bed at 9 p.m. trying to get to sleep and her phone buzzed at 9:12, she likely still would have picked up and replied to it. So it was just very, very strange that there was no reply. But let's say, for example, that maybe Claudia was just absolutely exhausted and she went to bed even earlier than she said. She went to bed at 8:30 p.m. and then she sleeps through the entire night and wakes up at 5 a.m. the next morning, which is when she usually woke up for work. She probably still would have replied the next morning when she saw it, unless she just forgot, which is also likely, I suppose. There's just so many questions surrounding this one unanswered text because it's just so unlike Claudia. If this was me, for example, and I didn't reply to a text at 9:12 p.m, that would be completely normal. You wouldn't be getting a reply for like at least 12 hours. That's my standard turnaround time. But for Claudia, that was strange. Now this text at 9:12 came from a friend of Claudia's called Steve. Now Steve actually lived in Cyprus, and Claudia had gone on holiday to Cyprus a few years earlier where she'd met him, and the two became really, really good friends. So much so that Claudia would actually fly back to the island pretty much every year just to see Steve. They would like get on really well. So whenever Claudia would go to Cyprus, they'd always have a drink, or if Steve came back to visit the UK, they'd always have a drink as well. So it's never been released what was said in this last text that Steve sent to Claudia, but it's likely something along the lines of like, oh, so when you come to visit, or should we go get a drink, or something like that. The next morning, Claudia doesn't turn up for work at 6 a.m, and it didn't seem like her workplace put too much effort into finding out where she was. I'm sure they probably called her and she didn't answer, and I think they just left it there. But later that evening as well, Claudia had arrangements to meet her best friend Susie Cooper at her local The Nag's Head pub. But Susie can't get hold of Claudia, and she's not heard anything from her. She's not sure of the plans. And this, as I stressed before, is really, really weird because Claudia would always be the person to reply to a text. So it seems like Susie sort of looked into what was happening with Claudia, and she eventually finds out that Claudia never turned up for work that day, and so she calls Peter, Claudia's dad. So Peter heads around to Claudia's house where he lets himself in with the spare key, and he's expecting to find the worst in there, but everything just looks completely normal, as if Claudia has left for work the next morning. Her slippers are by the front door, her bag, which would contain her chef whites, were gone, her phone was gone. It just looked like she'd left for work that morning. But Peter immediately knew that something was up. His daughter wouldn't just disappear. That wasn't the kind of person that she was. And so he calls the police, but Claudia actually wouldn't be officially reported as a missing person until the next day. Originally, the police, just like Peter, believed that Claudia had left for work as normal that morning. It seems that she'd eaten breakfast, her bed was made, she'd brushed her teeth, she'd left her purse and her jewellery behind, as she always did when she was going to work, and it seemed like she just put her slippers by the front door, put her shoes on and walked out, and that's pretty much all they could gather. The police and the media came forward asking for witnesses. They were asking if anybody had seen Claudia walking the route to work that morning, had they seen anything suspicious, and a cyclist actually comes forward, and this cyclist says that about 5:35 a.m. they'd seen a man wearing a black hooded top who was smoking with his left hand, talking to a woman wearing a blue jacket. He spotted them talking on a bridge, which would have been on Claudia's route to work. And then more significantly, somebody else came forward saying they'd seen the same couple, and they were actually closer to the university this time, but they were arguing now. And this would have been around 6:10 a.m, so it would have been after Claudia was supposed to already be at work. And neither of these people ever came forward. The police asked for them, they put loads and loads of things out in the media, in the press, asking for these two people to come forward, and they never did, which always makes something seem possibly more suspicious than it is. If these had come forward and they were just a couple going for a walk early in the morning, it might not have been anything, but because they've never come forward, the police can only believe that they are suspicious. And the fact that this couple is potentially suspicious was only exacerbated further when the police searched Claudia's car, and in the car they found a cigarette butt which seemed to have come from a smoker who was smoking with their left hand, same as the man who was walking on the bridge with this woman. Now, Claudia didn't smoke herself, and she actually didn't like being around smokers. Her mum said that she hated people smoking around her, so this was just very strange, the fact that the police found a cigarette butt in her car. But the police move on to a slightly different theory, and they start to work on the theory that Claudia had possibly disappeared the night before. They just couldn't discount the fact that Claudia had stopped texting so abruptly that night, and the police really clung on to this because, like I mentioned, Claudia would send thousands and thousands of texts late into the night. Now, police also pulled CCTV from the area around Claudia's house, and luckily for them, York was actually one of the most highly surveilled places in England at this time. I don't know if it still is. There was just CCTV everywhere. It was basically Big Brother, but for the police it worked out really well for them because they managed to find all of this footage. However, on none of this footage did it ever show anything happening to Claudia. At around 7:15 p.m. on March 17th, the last day that Claudia was seen, a man is captured on CCTV in the alleyway next to Claudia's house. And this man is acting very suspiciously. He's sort of like walking in frame, and then he disappears out of the frame for a moment and then appears back in the frame, this time holding a large bag. It's maybe a rucksack or just a really big bag which he's holding on one shoulder. It is likely that the man did have this bag on him before he disappeared out of frame, but he was just holding it in a different way. It's not the best quality, it's like very grainy footage, so maybe he did have it on him and you just can't see it, but it's very obvious when he walks back into shot, and he's looking very dodgy. And then another man walks into view, just a man walking down the alleyway who doesn't seem suspicious at all, and this guy holding the bag just stops and he just stands there waiting for this guy to pass, and when this guy passes, he carries on. Then at around 5 a.m. on Thursday morning, it seems like there's another man in the same alleyway, also wearing dark clothes, acting very dodgy. He does the same thing. He walks in and out of frame, he's looking around. This person's never been identified, and we don't know if it's the same person who was in the footage the night before. I think it probably is, but this is around the time that Claudia would have been waking up, getting ready to go to work. The police obviously followed this lead as far as they could, but without this guy coming forward or somebody coming forward and saying, like, I know who that is, there was really a very limited amount they could do with it. And so the police follow their line of inquiry in a different direction, and they actually head to Cyprus. And their small theory here was that Claudia had run away to start a new life in Cyprus with her friend Steve, which of course was proven not to be true very quickly. Claudia's passport was left in her home, she didn't take it with her, and the police interviewed Steve, and Steve was like, no, we're just friends, I just like wanted to text her to, I don't know exactly what was said in the text, but maybe go for a drink, see how she is, just general small talk, chit chat. And you can't discount the fact that Claudia had no reason to run away, but also maybe if she was just going on holiday somewhere, why would she not tell her family, like, oh, by the way, I'm heading to Cyprus tomorrow, I'll see you in a few weeks, or I'll let you know what my plan is once I'm out there. But no, she told her mum the day before that she was going to see her on Sunday. And as the investigation wears on, the media slowly begins to turn against Claudia. And this is something I remember happening at the time. It went from Claudia being this tragic woman who had gone missing to the entire country turning against her like that, just because the media decided they needed some more spicy headlines. It was really, really brutal. So the police had basically started to take a closer look at Claudia's private life, her personal life, as you always do in these investigations. And what they found painted Claudia in a very different light to how everyone else had been describing her. But Claudia did seem to lead a lot of separate lives. She kept all her different aspects of life very, very separated. So there was family Claudia, there was friends, social life Claudia, and then there was the work colleague Claudia. And each of these different groups described Claudia in very different ways, which I think is pretty normal. I act slightly different with my friends than I do with my family, for example. That's just how people are. But the media jumped on this, saying Claudia was leading all these secret lives and her family didn't really know who she was. The media jumped on this chance to expose Claudia's secret life that she was living. But at the end of the day, she was a 35-year-old woman. She wasn't married. She didn't have any children. It's more than normal for her to have a life that her family don't know about. But the media took this and ran. Detectives slowly began to unravel Claudia's private life through her text messages and phone calls and through interviews with friends and acquaintances, and particularly through other patrons of the Nag's Head. And they discovered that Claudia had a very intricate web of lovers and ex-lovers, and it was determined that around the time that she disappeared, she would have had around 40 lovers. Now, this baffles me a little bit because I'm not sure if they meant 40 at one time, which would be impressive, or if this was like 40 lovers, I assume, all men, that spread out over the previous couple of years, or like she was talking to 40 people at this one time. Her friend said that Claudia was a heavy drinker, but she could handle her alcohol. She didn't go off the rails. But she was also naive and easily led, and she would just believe what people told her. Apparently Claudia had a certain affinity for older men who she would conduct affairs with. She spent the night with one of her lovers just 2 nights beforehand. I don't know if this particular man was married or not. And the police conducted multiple appeals, asking for anybody who had sort of like a romantic relationship with Claudia to come forward. And I don't think anybody did, but of course if most of these men were married, then they're not going to. And it seemed that after this point, after the media realised that Claudia was having affairs with married men, which of course is not a good thing, it's wrong, but when the media realised this, they decided that Claudia wasn't a good person, she was horrible, and it destroyed the investigation to find her. All they did was focus on her private life, which was just that, it was her private life, and she is responsible for having affairs with married men, but these men are also responsible. Claudia was the single one, these men are the ones who are married, so it's their responsibility as much as it is hers. And nobody cared anymore that Claudia was missing. People only cared that she was having affairs. She was no longer the sweet, hard-working chef who everyone loved. She was now a gold digger, a manhunter, and she was set out to destroy other people's lives. But you've got to remember that people aren't two-dimensional. Everyone has a private life. Everyone makes decisions that other people probably wouldn't. But this doesn't make them intrinsically awful people. Were these some poor life decisions on Claudia's behalf? Definitely, there's no denying that. But should this have overshadowed the search for Claudia in any way? No, of course it shouldn't have done, because the number one priority is this woman who is either in severe danger or she's possibly dead. And honestly, this completely derailed the entire investigation, because now with the press focusing on all of Claudia's misdemeanours, people, the public, stopped caring. People stopped looking for Claudia whilst they were out walking the streets. People stopped phoning in with tips. This was it. It was pretty much over by this point. Claudia's family dismissed all the claims about Claudia's private life, and they publicly spoke out against them. And Peter even went on TV to try and dispute these claims and say that the number one priority is getting Claudia back. It doesn't matter what she was doing in her private life. She needs to come back. After 6 weeks, the North Yorkshire Police upgrade Claudia's case from a missing persons case to a murder case, which surprisingly her mother actually didn't agree with. She didn't want it to become a murder case because there was no proof that Claudia was dead. But of course, when a case is upgraded like this, it does become a bigger priority. You've got more eyes looking at it, you've got different teams of people looking at it, and it just puts a fresh set of eyes on the investigation. But Claudia's family had a lot of criticisms when it came to the early days of the investigation. Her mum actually said that the police didn't contact her at all in the first few days after Claudia disappeared. She said that she was expecting a call, she was expecting the police to come around and interview her, to take a statement, and they just didn't do that. She also said that she would have expected the police to contact her to get her to help them look through Claudia's apartment, see if anything was amiss. But again, they didn't do that either. And if anybody's going to know if anything's wrong in Claudia's apartment or house, I keep calling it apartment, I think it was a house, her mum's going to be the one to know that. And they didn't ever ask her. And she actually said that when she saw photos of Claudia's home years later, she spotted a few things that were amiss, a few things that she would have picked up on if she was there, but of course it was years later, so it was a bit too late. But also, vitally, the first photo that the police released of Claudia was actually the complete wrong photo. It was misleading because it showed Claudia with block blonde highlights in her hair, and Claudia didn't have that hair anymore. She was now a brunette. So everybody in the early days of the investigation, or the public, were looking for a woman with blonde hair, and she didn't have blonde hair. Of course, naturally, as time went on, the investigation really began to slow down, and in October, the authorities announced they were looking for a rusty white van. Apparently, a few women around the area had reported this white van that would stop next to them and try to make conversation, you know, as creepy guys do. I'm sure every girl's had an experience like that. Over the next year, various areas of land around York are searched, including a children's play area, a little bit of wasteland, and a lot of areas around the university, but this doesn't lead to anything. On the 29th of July 2010, the police actually report that they are scaling back the operation. They're dramatically reducing the amount of officers on it, and that's kind of it. Although they do carry on looking, it's just a much smaller investigation. And around Christmas time of 2010, a body's actually found, and everyone thinks it's Claudia, and it's not. And for a couple of years, that's kind of it, until June 2013, when the North Yorkshire Police announced a new major crimes unit, which is going to cost them £300,000. And in the July, they announced they're going to look into a whole load of old cases, including that of Claudia Lawrence. On the 29th of October 2013, this major crimes unit announced they're going to do a new, fresh forensic search of Claudia's home. And this is to begin as the fresh review is launched. Now, Peter, Claudia's dad, actually carried on the payments on Claudia's home because he wanted Claudia to have a house if she ever came back. So over the years, he has always kept up the mortgage payments, which was handy when in 2013 they wanted to go back and do fresh forensics. He'd pretty much left it as it was. He was just paying the payments. They used brand new advanced technologies that weren't available in 2009 when Claudia went missing, and they actually found additional fingerprints that weren't found before, and they found DNA found on the fag butt that was in Claudia's car. They also used new technology to find out that Claudia's phone was actually manually switched off on the 18th of March around 12:10 p.m, so the afternoon of the next day. They also used new technology to find out that Claudia's phone was actually turned off at 12:10 p.m. on Thursday the 19th of March. So it remained on for quite a while, and then it either turned off or the battery ran out. Claudia's phone has never been found. And they also focused on some CCTV footage that had kind of been dismissed by the police all those years earlier. It was originally recovered in 2009, but they really zoned in on it in 2013. And this footage showed a silver Ford Focus, which was driving along Heworth Road, which is the road on which Claudia lived. And the driver kind of brakes in front of Claudia's house and starts to crawl along. Now, this may of course be a coincidence. Maybe something was in the road that the footage doesn't pick up on. Maybe the person just happened to slow down there. But the police want to question them, obviously, and just ask what it is. But they've never found this car. On the 13th of May 2014, 59-year-old Michael Snelling is arrested on suspicion of murder. And this was the first arrest in the case. This was huge. I remember this in the news at the time. Now, Michael Snelling actually worked at the university with Claudia, but in a different department. Obviously, universities are massive. So he worked in the biology department. So they arrest him, the police begin a dig at his home, they seize his car, and they basically do a forensic search, but it ends after just a week, and Michael is let go, and that's pretty much it. I don't know what they had on Michael to be able to arrest him, but clearly it didn't stand up because they had to let him go. And it's likely that Michael was actually innocent and had nothing to do with it, because it doesn't seem like the police found anything in his home or his car. But then on the 23rd of March 2015, another man is arrested. This time he wasn't ID'd. He's in his 50s, and he was arrested following a fresh search of the alleyway next to Claudia's house. But again, this guy was let off, he was let out by the police, and we don't know any more information than that. But around this same time, in March 2015, the North Yorkshire Police made a fresh appeal for any information about Claudia, and shortly after this, 4 men are arrested. So they're arrested on suspicion of murder and they're let out on bail. But in 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service actually make the decision not to charge them. The North Yorkshire Police blame this on the fact that there was a lack of cooperation from the witnesses. So I assume that one person came forward with a very, very vital piece of information and then they decided not to talk anymore. And the Crown Prosecution actually said this decision wasn't taken lightly, but I don't really know, again, any more information than that. It seems like the police are keeping their cards very, very close to their chest with this one. In 2018, again with new DNA technology, further testing is done on the fag butt that was found in Claudia's car, and they were hoping to basically trace the DNA through a familial match. Now, if you've watched some of my videos, the Yara Gabracio video that I did, I spoke a lot about familial DNA. So it's where you get some DNA and then you can basically find a familial match and trace them down through their family tree until you get your person in a very condensed way. But basically the police did this, they spent ages on it and they didn't get anything. They didn't get a single match. From what I could find out, the police spent like a lot of time at this. They thought this was going to be their like big open door to finding this person, and they couldn't even find a family member, anybody even slightly related. So my kind of theory here is that whoever did this is possibly not from the UK, not English, and therefore their family would all be abroad. So maybe a European or somebody along those lines. Although the case has been massively scaled back, the case is still open, so the police are still looking into it, just on a much smaller scale. There have been many links made in Claudia's case to other disappearances, namely Melanie Hall and Joanne Yates, which are another 2 hugely prolific UK missing persons cases. I'm sure I'll cover them one day, but you can give them a Google if you want to know more information now. And there's also been lots of suspicions that Claudia's case could be linked to double murderer Christopher Halliwell, who, if you are from the UK, you've probably heard that name. He killed 2 girls in about, I think it was about 3-year time span. He's spending life in prison. A lot of people say that he had something to do with Claudia's death, because Christopher would pick up girls who were walking alone in the early morning or late at night. And Christopher's father actually lived only a few roads over from Claudia, and so Christopher would have known this area well and he would have spent time there. There are many similarities which could link Christopher to this case. However, the police have said that they've looked into it and they can't actually find any evidence to suggest that he had anything to do with it. But Christopher does also match the very vague description of Claudia's killer. Basically, the police don't really have anything, but if they're going by this guy in the alleyway who was definitely a little bit dodgy, it's likely that he was left-handed, he was a smoker, if you're linking back to the people seen on Claudia's walk to work. 5'8", 5'10", skinny build, possibly balding on top of their heads. Again, very loose description, but Christopher Halliwell does match this. There's still so many unanswered questions when it comes to this case, but I definitely feel like the police are keeping their cards close to their chest. They're really not sharing anything, which is probably for the best. So I'm pretty sure the police know a lot more than they've told us. I'd definitely be intrigued to know more about the 4 men who were arrested and then let go. The police clearly had something very important on them, but it wasn't ever really shared. Claudia's mum believes very much that she was trafficked out of the country. She said that she doesn't think Claudia's dead because she's never had that severing feeling. She's never had the feeling that Claudia isn't with her anymore, which it depends if you believe in that kind of stuff or not, I suppose. Personally, I think that whatever happened to Claudia, it was planned. There's too little evidence to suggest that somebody hadn't completely thought this through. I would be very shocked if it turned out to be a crime of opportunity, because that person would have to get so lucky. The guy in the alleyway is very suspicious, and once again I'd be very shocked if this guy didn't have anything to do with it. To me it seems like he was there at 5 AM knowing that that's around the time that Claudia leaves her house, possibly watched her leave and followed her, and when he knew there were no cameras around or any people, he grabbed her, possibly had a car waiting at the side of the road, and that's it. Possibly a lover, possibly just a complete stranger. Who were these men that Claudia was having all these affairs with? Did they all have alibis? Did the police manage to find them all? Did they question them all? I don't think they did, because nobody's going to want to come forward and you're not going to be broadcasting it to the world if you're having an affair with somebody? Were any of these men any of the 6 that have been arrested over the course of this case? The answer probably lies with the cigarette butt in Claudia's car, because if it was just one of her friends smoking in a car, then I'm sure they would have come forward and said like, oh yeah, I was smoking in a car a couple of weeks ago, that would be mine. But it doesn't seem like anybody did. And again, when people don't come forward, it does seem more suspicious. But if whoever was smoking in Claudia's car was the one to take her, to hurt her, then Claudia knew her killer, knew her abductor. There are so many questions in this case. Sometimes I think that she disappeared the night before, sometimes I think it's that morning, sometimes I think a stranger just grabbed her, other times I think that it was fully planned. There are just so many unanswered questions, and I really hope the police do know more than they're letting on. As always, leave all your theories down below and give this video a thumbs up if you like it. I'll leave some details for the North Yorkshire Police down below, just in case you happen to know anything, if you're around York at the time and picked up on anything. Highly unlikely, of course, but I'll leave it down there just in case you think you may know anything. I'll also leave my links to my Patreon and my merch store down there as well. And make sure you subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.